Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our next computer side chat. Today we'll be taking a deep dive on the concept of federalism. Now, to this point, with regards to the U.S. Constitution, we've talked about a few things. We've looked at the basic structure of the document, we've talked about the goals and principles that drove the document itself, and we're kind of in the midst of going a little bit deeper on some of these key principles. We started with separation of powers and checks and balances, and now I want to move on to looking at federalism. And federalism is really, really important for us to look at, not just to understand how our government is structured in general, but also to understand the American political debate. Because this idea of dividing power between the state and federal government and who gets what powers is really central or core to that debate. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And so our central question is, how are powers divided up within a federal system of government? So let's start by reviewing what is federalism and the federal system of government. Well, a government that uses a federal system or uses federalism is a government that divides power between the federal or national and the state level of government. So powers are relatively equally distributed between the federal on one hand and the state level governments on the other. So why federalism? Why would the framers and the writers of the Constitution choose this system of government? Well, the simple explanation for that is that it was a good balance. Specifically, it was a balance between giving states power to take care of their citizens, but also having a federal government that was able to protect the country and keep business running as usual without any problems or hiccups. It prevented the creation of a tyrannical central authority, but at the same time didn't water down that central authority so much that it was useless. So that's why we decided to go with this federal system of government with the U.S. Constitution when we replaced the Articles of Confederation. So with that said, let's look at how these powers are divided up. And for that, we'll look at the four types of government powers. First, let's start with delegated powers. And delegated powers are powers that are delegated to the federal government. In other words, these are powers that the federal government holds alone. There are two types of delegated powers we want to talk about. The first is enumerated or expressed powers. These are powers that are explicitly written into the Constitution as being powers held by the federal government. So, for example, it is written directly within the Constitution that Congress will have the power to declare war. We know they have that power because it is written or expressed or enumerated within the words of the Constitution itself. The second category of delegated powers are what are known as implied powers. And implied powers are powers that are not expressly written within the Constitution anywhere, but they're relevant to those enumerated and expressed powers, and therefore the federal government has those powers so that they are able to carry out their job. So an example of this that would go in hand with the enumerated power that we just talked about is it is expressed or enumerated that Congress can declare war. An implied power that goes along with that is that Congress has the ability to declare a military draft, to draft individuals in the military so that it can fight that war. Nowhere within the Constitution is it written that the government, specifically Congress, can declare a draft. But we believe that it is implied so that Congress does have the ability to carry out that mission or that power of declaring and waging war. To understand applied powers, one of the things that we need to understand is what is known as the necessary and proper clause, also known as the elastic clause. And this is the clause of the Constitution that gives the federal government its implied powers. Specifically, it says the government will have the ability to do whatever is necessary and proper to carry out its enumerated or expressed job. So this is the clause where federal government draws its implied powers from. All right, let's move on to the three other types of powers. First is reserved powers. These are powers reserved specifically for the states. Now, according to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, this means that any power not expressly written in the Constitution or not implied by the Constitution is automatically given to the states. So any power that does not go to the federal government automatically is given to the states itself. This includes control of things like roads, whether that's building and maintenance of roads, or whether that's passing laws on roads with regards to things like speed limits. This also includes things like education. So all of those are examples of reserved powers, or things that are controlled by the states, not the federal government. Next is concurrent powers. And concurrent powers are powers that are shared by both the federal and state governments. So both of these entities have the power to do these things. So some examples of this would be taxes. There are both federal and state taxes. Another example would be the ability to pass laws. So there are both federal and state laws. And then lastly, the ability to borrow money. The federal government has the ability to take out loans, but so do the state governments. If need be, they can take out loans in order to pay for things, just like the federal government can. And then lastly, we have denied powers. These are powers that neither the federal nor state governments have. Government is not allowed to do these things in any circumstance. And so that includes things like the government cannot just search your property without a warrant, and they cannot restrict free speech. That is true both at the federal level as well as at the state level. Neither levels of government have the power to do those things. All right, so that is a quick rundown of federalism and the four types of power that go along with federalism. Go ahead at this point, if you would like, write any questions that you have in the margins so that we can go over those tomorrow. And then write your summary and come in ready tomorrow to take the quiz. Have a great night. See you then.